In this lesson, we're going to look at how we can use Adobe Premiere Pro to compile a series of media assets such as music, photos, and video into a seamless documentary. Now, before we get started, I've created here a folder on the desktop, labeled it Documentary on Jean Beliveau, a famous hockey player from the Montreal Canadiens. Now, if I open this folder, there are other folders within it that contain all of the media elements or media assets, such as the music, which was created in GarageBand, the photos, and the narrative essay, and as well as videos. And over here I have an audio folder for the recording of the narrative essay. So essentially, when I go back to Premiere Pro, I want to mimic that. I want to have a series of folders, and I do, such as audio, music, and photos. I've already created those to save time. Now, to create a folder in this asset window, one simply has to right click on any empty space in that window and choose New Bin, which is basically a new folder, or you can hit the new folder icon down here, and there you go. You can change the view that you have as well. If you want, you can switch to an icon view, and you can rename your folder. However, I'm going to switch to my list view, and you'll notice we have two monitors here. Now, this monitor to the left is primarily a viewer for the assets in your asset window. For example, let me open the photos and let me double click on one of the photos, which is captaincy. Double click on that, and you'll notice that it opens up here and we're able to view it or preview it. Now, if I were to take this picture and drag it into the timeline on video track 1, it is now in my timeline. My timeline is also my sequence. You'll notice over here the title says timeline sequence 01. And anytime I add media assets in the timeline, these basically add up into a number of building blocks, and those building blocks will basically form the composition of my video documentary, and that composition is played up here. This is the sequence viewer. In certain cases, when I drop assets down here in the timeline, if I want to modify some of their properties, I can double click on the asset, and now the assets that's in the timeline opens up in the viewer over here. Then I can tab over to the effects tab over here and control some of the effects for that particular asset, that picture. And what I want to do in this case is I want it to slowly zoom in. And to do that, I'm going to go to the motion tab, and I'm going to take the scale, and let's see if I reduce that. Okay, that's pretty good. Let's reduce that about 76%. Now, I'm going to want this to zoom in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a keyframe. So beside the scale button, which is now set to 76%, I'm going to hit a keyframe. You'll notice my playback head is at the beginning, the very first frame where that picture plays in the timeline. And I'm going to turn on the keyframes now, and it automatically inserts a keyframe at the beginning point. I move my playback head to the last frame where the picture plays. Now, I accidentally skipped off a bit. If I use my arrow keys, left and right arrow keys, I can move it one frame at a time and find the exact spot where it ends. And here's the end point where it ends on the timeline. And I'll insert another keyframe. And I'm also going to do it for position, because what happens is if I start zooming in on this picture, okay, so basically I start off at, let me jump back using these arrows. I'll jump back to the first keyframe. I'm starting at 76%. By the time I get to the second keyframe, I'm telling the computer I want you to be at, let's say, 125% or something like that. But you'll notice that as I do that, I cut off his head. So as the picture zooms in, you may want it to move simultaneously. So you know what, we're going to add, let's jump back here to the first keyframe, but now jump up over here where it says position, turn the keyframes on for position now. Let's jump over using our scale menu. Let's jump over to the last keyframe and then go up here to the position keyframe and add a second one. So now I have At the beginning of the video I have a keyframe for scale and position, and at the end I have a keyframe for scale and position. And now that I am on the last keyframes, I'm going to click on that video and move it downward. And you'll see there's a little path that's visible here. So let's see the effect of that. If I hit play, my spacebar, and there you go. Okay, next let's insert a second picture. Or actually, here he's being awarded. He's being honored at the Bell Center in Montreal. So let's drop this in timeline 2. Video track 2 above. And I'll show you why I'm going to do that in a second. Okay, so now we have the first picture zooming in, and now we have the second picture suddenly appearing. I'm going to double click this. It opens up in this window, and I'm just shrinking the windows. Notice I grabbed between the two video windows. I kind of shrank one to gain space for the other so I could obtain my effects controls tab. And I'm going to do like I did before. Go to the first frame where that second picture appears, open up the motion menu, and immediately turn on a keyframe for scale and position, because we know we're going to have to change the position as we scale up the photo. And let's go to the last frame where it appears and put a keyframe for both again, and tell the computer that by keyframe B we want you to increase in size to about 167%, and furthermore we want the position to change so that he stays in full view. There we go. Now let me reposition my windows as such. And this is basically what we've got. Let me move my playback head over here. Okay, now you notice there was a rough jump from one to the other. Now we have one of two options if we want a smooth transition between these two clips. We can open up, watch this, we can open up the envelope on the video layer, video 2 layer. See this little arrow? We're going to expand the track, and I'm going to go right here, right about here, and I'm going to click on this keyframe button, and over here click on the keyframe button. So you have two keyframes. However, I'm going to take the first keyframe and drag it down, meaning I want the opacity to be 0. So it actually is at 0. It's not visible, and as the keyframe moves up, the opacity is increasing so that it slowly fades in and takes over from the first picture. That's one way of doing it. Let me undo those two keyframes, and let me try another way, which is more common, and that is to put the clips side by side, and then to go to our effects window down here in the lower left and go to video effects, video transitions. I'll grab a simple dissolve and drop a cross dissolve, not to the left, not to the right of the clip, but so that the dissolve is evenly distributed between the end of the previous clip and the beginning of the next one. And here's what we get. Now, if I hit play, we got a cross dissolve. At the beginning of the video, I also want this to fade in. So let's click on the first picture, click on the keyframe for that picture, move it over here, click on another keyframe, and now I'm going to drag the first keyframe downward. There we go. So now we have a situation where it fades in. If I want the fade to be longer, I drag the second keyframe over, and now we get a much longer fade in. Finally, if I want to add some music from my assets, let me close these pictures, or even let's go to the narrative. Here we have an intro. Let's drop our intro into, okay, it dropped into audio track 4. Let's see how that sounds.
Jean Le Gros Bill Beliveau was the definition of the perfect hockey player, skilled and incredibly powerful on his...
So that's it for this lesson on a basic mixing of media assets with cross dissolves and fade-ins and fade-outs. And in the next lesson, we're going to look at how we can properly include video, as well as take a closer look at some audio editing with blending in of music that fades in and fades out at appropriate moments.